Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live for Friday, September the 6th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. You can follow me over at JT_Ruhnke. Once again, I am joined by my co-host, Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief of the So Bros Network, 1/3 of Football and Other F Words, and writer at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, hey, we made it to episode 2. There were people asking if people actually wanted this show.
Yeah.
And people do. So we are back here for the second episode of the new era of the Hot Read Podcast. And we also now have some actual football that matters to talk about. Last night's game against the Chiefs and Ravens kicked off the season in quite a fashion. There was a lot of things going on in that game, some good, some bad, some Derrick Henry discussion, which I'm sure we'll touch on here in a second. But your thoughts on the inaugural game of the 2024 season?
Well, first of all, JT, TGIF, it is happy hour here on the Hot Read Podcast. I got my Bluegrass Beverages cup going. We made it to the end of another long, hard work week, so I hope everybody is kicking back and enjoying the Hot Read with us in style. I'm also not wearing pants for today's show, just so everybody knows. The attire of the Hot Read Podcast has been a hot topic of discussion this week, and I forgot to do laundry. So when I went to pull another pair of gym shorts out of my chest of drawers earlier today, I didn't have any. So we're just winging it. We are just winging it.
Eat your heart out, PK. Here at the Hot Read Podcast, we're like we are just flying by the seat of our pants, literally.
That's right. But last night's game, man, it was sloppy. I thought there was some pretty poor offensive line play on both sides. I kind of thought that Kansas City just did what they had to do to win. I didn't think they particularly looked like world champions either, but you kind of feel for Lamar Jackson back there fighting for his life on every other snap, just making plays with his legs. And I couldn't help but wonder how long he's going to hold up with that kind of workload, just fighting for his life and taking those hits, because he took some big hits in the game last night. And if that keeps up, man, I just wonder about the longevity of his season.
Yeah, that's definitely a key point to that game. I mean, you talk about them kind of switching, I believe it was the right tackle last night in the middle of the game, bringing in Roger Rosengarten, and on his first play, Chris Jones absolutely manhandles him. Welcome to 2024, buddy, and absolutely gets after Lamar Jackson. I really just have one question that came to mind after that game yesterday, and that's going to be, so who let the Chiefs get Xavier Worthy? Like, I know we talked about that when he was drafted, but really, who did? And I guess the answer, which I was pointed out last night when I asked that question on Twitter, of course, was the Buffalo Bills, who trade back in that spot to let the Chiefs take Xavier Worthy there. Now, will he end up panning out better than Keon Coleman? That's yet to be seen. But I mean, an impressive first outing for him. I believe I saw a stat. He's the first ever receiver to have a 20-plus yard receiving touchdown and rushing touchdown in their first game ever. So he comes on and lights the world on fire. And Logan in the comments here saying anyone could have scored that TV. There was 700 TD. There was 700 blockers. I think that's definitely fair. And
hold
on.
I just want to push back on Logan a little bit. There was a convoy out in front, but there were 3 Ravens linebackers within range of bringing Xavier Worthy down. But if you watch the play back, the angles they take are indicative of them not appreciating how quickly Worthy could step on the gas and really accelerate through that hole. So well blocked, yes, but I do think that Worthy deserves a little more credit on that play than he's being given. And it's not just Logan. I'm not trying to single Logan out either, because we had people in our group chats last night saying the same thing, that was just all like well blocked, and you know, anybody could have run through that. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, that is a good point. If you do, and another good point here is if you have any hot takes or reactions to yesterday's game, feel free to leave them here in the Broadway Sports Media or 440 YouTube channel pages. And if you're not watching on one of those two places, what are you doing? Get your butt over there. If you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, we do appreciate you watching. But it's so much fun. It's so much more fun when you get to interact with the show like Easton. Here he is. He says, give me the weeds, fella. Hurricane Lou, Zach Riley, Jake in the comments as well. And then Wyatt, Logan, so many others. We appreciate you guys joining us here today. I do want to talk about real quick the offensive line. Was a very big point of interest last night to start that game, from the Ravens offensive line just not looking like they knew how to play offensive line, just like they forgot the fundamentals of where you're supposed to line up.
Yes.
Where we really need to discuss this Jawan Taylor situation, because how did he get away with it last year? And then we continued back into this season, and everything stays the same. He's just allowed to kind of do whatever he wants. And I think that's quite funny.
And the amazing thing was that he did have a penalty called against him for that, but he did it at least 2 other times in the game that they did not throw the flag for. And I can't figure out for the life of me, JT, how they have not put this man in jail yet. I mean, he just repeat offender. Give him the cuffs, lock him up. How can he keep getting away with this?
Yeah, it was it was troubling to say the least, and we'll see if teams look to exploit that down the road here. Well, we've gone 6-ish minutes without, probably bad on my end, but without telling you that we are presented by Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages, their sister location. If you know 440, you know them, but if not, we are happy to introduce you. More on them later, but once again, thank you for Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring this podcast and bringing you all this, the lovely people bringing you this content for free. So we'll get to them more later. Anything else on last night's game before we get into the more important game, and probably why people are here watching with us today, the Titans versus the Bears? Anything else that you had on last night's game?
Yeah, just a few quick notes. We were talking about Xavier Worthy. I was not very high on either of the Texas receivers coming out of the draft. And then on draft night, when the Kansas City Chiefs selected Worthy, I kind of sat there for a moment like, oh, wait, no, I get it. I see the vision here. So I said last night, I wish we could know which teams players were going to when we were making our evals during the draft, because it might make things a little easier for me. I also think the Ravens defense looked really disoriented early on. Maybe the absence of Denard Wilson, the absence of Mike McDonald, seeing the changes in the coaching staff there in real time, this defense trying to figure out how to move on from those guys and how to get their feet beneath them. And then also I felt like Travis Kelce, the big playmaker for Kansas City, did not look as electric and dynamic as he has before. And you just wonder if that's age starting to catch up with a dynamic player. Maybe there's a little bit of load management there, that they're not going to lean on him in the very first game of the season. But just a couple of interesting observations that I made outside of Xavier Worthy and both of these offensive lines looking like very much a work in progress.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one more point on Travis Kelce. It feels like with this sick, hot, nasty speed that the Chiefs now have back in their arsenal since the departure of Tyreek Hill, it almost feels like Travis Kelce just now kind of has, like, all he has to do out there is just the aura, and he's going to command double teams, which allows guys like Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy to do what they do best, which is use their speed and Rashee Rice's route running ability, if you can really call it a route tree anyways. I mean, welcome back, slant boy, Rashee Rice. It seems that's the only thing that he ran last night, but it is pretty interesting to see how both tight ends, as Jake says in the comments, definitely need sinkers after starting Mark Andrews in fantasy football. It feels like those two veteran guys were used more as decoys last night more than anything.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. It just kind of felt like everybody was getting into a rhythm. I don't know that anybody on the field last night quite seemed like their true self.
I mean, one last one, Isaiah Pacheco, man, he looked absolutely on fire, like everything as advertised.
And Creed Humphrey, I don't know why I said
Creed
that.
Humphrey, yeah, there you go.
Out there.
Well, let's
bowling people over.
Speaking of bowling people over, that's something that the Titans are going to try to do against this Chicago Bears defense this weekend as they head up to Soldier Field to take on the Chicago Bears. A matchup where I think you're going to have two quarterbacks that are looking to shine this week and make a statement for themselves. One, Caleb Williams with his first ever game. Obviously, the media attention on him is ever growing, and the circus plays that he was making in the preseason, caught a lot of people's eyes. Certainly, apparently did not catch Bill Belichick's eye for sure. So take that as you will. And then you have Will Levis, who, this is his first year as the guy, doing a bunch of Mayo ads and kind of campaigning himself up to become a star in this league. A good game for him would kind of only propel him into that conversation that he could be the guy. So those are two guys that I think, when you talk about the guys who are looking to shine this weekend, it's probably between those two.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And I think these are two different situations as far as pressure and expectation. We know a little bit about what Will Levis is to this point, and we know there are a few things that he needs to rein in a little bit to answer questions about whether or not he's the long-term franchise quarterback for this team. There are a lot of people nationally. I saw some guys in the 104.5 The Zone chat earlier today. I was watching Blaine and Zach a little bit, saying that the Titans are going to be drafting Carson Beck next spring. And you just see like how tuned out a lot of the national analysts and the national conversations are on this team. But I think for Will Levis, it is kind of a prove it year. Whereas in Chicago, man, they are hyped to the moon over the addition of Caleb Williams. So I'm kind of interested to see how the expectations and potentially pressure play into this game, because it feels like Titans fans will probably be a little patient with Will Levis given the circumstances and the overhaul around him. But I just wonder what's going to happen if things don't go well for Caleb Williams. And I do think there's a chance that things might not go well for Caleb Williams against Denard Wilson's defense that there's no tape on for the Bears to study. Any work that they're doing film-wise is going to be guesswork from watching Ravens, Buccaneers tape, that sort of thing. So I think it's an interesting conversation with two guys that are trying to really cement themselves as future quarterbacks in the league, not just for their respective franchises, but this is two guys that are kind of the next wave of quarterbacks of the future. So I think both of these guys will be looking to make plays in their own right and in their own way, but I'm curious to see how the fans react to this one once it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of questions wanting to be answered this weekend. You know what else would really be like to answer this weekend is DeAndre Hopkins. Is he going to play? Is he not? That's another big talking point of this game. As we look at the injury report that came out earlier today, it's the final injury report before this weekend. And looking at the Titans side, two guys who are confirmed out in Otis Reese, still in that concussion protocol, still working through that. And then Jamal Adams, who we did not see at all week at practice. He is ruled out with a hip injury. So, we talked about earlier this season when they signed him, this was going to be part of the gig here. And that's why he's on that kind of so cheap prove it deal. And it's already starting to look like it may not work out for the best for Jamal Adams here, as he misses week 1 with a hip injury, something that, it really wasn't, the hip was not the thing, correct me if I'm wrong, that we were really concerned about throughout his entire, training camp. It was kind of more just management with him. And that's why he was not practicing a lot. And all of a sudden this week, this pops up. So it is a little concerning to see him out there. And then you have the two guys who are questionable this week. The one that we've been, watching all week, DeAndre Hopkins, limited participation all 3 days this week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. He's officially listed as questionable. And then Chido Awuzie popped up today with a calf injury and is questionable. However, to get that one out of the way, I really am not concerned about him missing. I think it would be a big surprise. Brian Callahan certainly today did not sound like he was that concerned. So maybe just kind of, maybe he tweaked it a little bit and they gave him a little bit of the day off. But the big one for sure is DeAndre Hopkins, which we learned yesterday from Paul Kaharski, who did a nifty little bit of reporting here and found that it is indeed an MCL tear for DeAndre Hopkins, something that, you know, will require surgery eventually, whether it be right now and getting it over with or at the end of the season. It's something that he is going to have to manage this entire season. And so the question I want to ask you here, Stoney, is that now that we know that it's not just kind of a one-stop shop issue, it's something that's going to linger all season. What are the expectations for DeAndre Hopkins this season? Like, we know he is the wide receiver one of this team still, but now considering that he's going to have to manage this, should we lower our expectations for what we are, you know, seeing from DeAndre Hopkins this season?
I think I had already lowered my expectations somewhat anyway from where they were in 2023 because of the addition of Calvin Ridley and sort of the fleshing out of the two roles that we've heard all summer from Brian Callahan. Hopkins as the X and Ridley as the Z. That sort of thing kind of changed my perception of what Hopkins would be in the passing game anyway, just by virtue of having a running mate. I mean, we don't even have to get into the scheme of the offense, but just to have another capable guy like Calvin Ridley and then the addition of Tyler Boyd in the slot, man, I think it kind of alleviated some of the responsibility that Hopkins had to put this passing game on his shoulders and be the guy for Will Levis. Now, I will say, I think against this particular defense, it would be really awesome to have DeAndre Hopkins out there because he is a very savvy route runner, times his breaks very well, seems to have a knack against zone coverage and splitting off and getting open. And I think that could be handy, could come in handy against a defense that runs a lot of zone like this. So that kind of bums me out a little bit. I think my expectations had already come down a little bit. This sounds like it's going to basically be a pain management issue for Hopkins, and I hate to hear that before the season has even started. So I do think that it's possible. I don't know what the ins and outs are as far as aggravating the injury, potentially making it worse, or if this genuinely is just a how long can he play through it kind of deal. But I do worry a little bit, and I think that that affects the expectations just a bit, but they were already down a little bit to begin with for me.
Yeah, and I think Jake in the comments here, it says it definitely hurts the extend him sooner rather than later crowd. That's something that I think a lot of people were on the bandwagon of. This guy is a perfect fit for Will Levis. Well, you kind of have to pump the brakes on that one because you don't want to extend a guy who's now going to kind of, as we talked about last year, getting over that hill, the age 30 hill, and things, you know, I heard someone yesterday on the radio, I don't remember where I said it, but I think they were talking about Russell Wilson and his injury. And they said, as an older player, you never get better. It just continues to break down. And so that's something I think, you know, DeAndre Hopkins is going to definitely have to work through here. But I think that does bring up a discussion. Who should, if DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is not able to go this week, and we've heard conflicting reports from a former Titans player, Taylor Lewan, saying that he's already confirmed not going to play, to, you know, DeAndre Hopkins himself not really believing those sources right there. I think it does bring up a question that if DeAndre Hopkins does end up missing this game, who should we expect to step up? And it was an important question that they asked Brian Callahan today, in which Callahan said that he does not see the Titans elevating a wide receiver from the practice squad this week. If DeAndre Hopkins isn't able to go, Callahan is good with the group of wide receivers they have already. So I think that brings up a question here, which I've heard some rumblings about you wanting to maybe make this statement, but if DeAndre Hopkins does not go this weekend, should we be on the lookout for a week one, you know, stellar Tyler Boyd game? Is it going to be the Tyler Boyd game to end all Tyler Boyd games?
I do think that it's going to be a big Tyler Boyd game for reasons. I don't know if you want me to get into it now, but because the question's about DeAndre Hopkins, but I actually think this is going to be a moment where the rubber meets the road and it's put up or shut up. And we're going to hear, or we're going to see, if everything we've heard from this staff and this organization about Treylon Burks this summer, if it's something they really mean or if it was just fluff talk. Because what we heard after one of the preseason games, I can't recall, we were getting a little clarity from Brian Callahan on the X receiver, the Z receiver, and a little nugget in there we found out was that Burks was actually their backup plan at the X spot, which is where DeAndre Hopkins was, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine was Ridley's backup in the Z spot. And I think that surprised a lot of people given their two physical and athletic profiles. So now we're going to know if Hopkins doesn't play in this game, if that was all just fluff to really prop up Treylon Burks this summer, or if they meant it. And if they put Burks out there in that spot, Listen, I think there are situations in this game where he can take advantage of being matched up against, I would assume, Tyreek Stevenson. Physically gifted guy. I don't think Stevenson is the best press man corner in the NFL. I didn't like him a whole lot coming out of the draft, but when you think about, like we talked about with Xavier Worthy, if you're really good in zone and you don't like playing press man, Chicago is probably a pretty good place for you to go. But in those situations where they are playing man, I think Burks is a little more athletic and physically gifted to get through that more than I would say Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I think Boyd's going to play in the slot. I think that's what they brought him here to do. I think playing in the slot really gives him the opportunity to work his magic because he's got the whole field to work with. He can break in, he can break out, depending on what the coverage is. I don't think they want to necessarily get worse at multiple positions, right? Because I don't think they're going to move Ridley from the Z to the X.
That was one of my questions as well. That I think we can discuss here, but it sounds like you're going to answer it anyways. Would if DeAndre Hopkins is not there, right? Would it benefit them moving kind of Calvin to that X spot and playing on maybe a more advantageous cornerback matchup, or is it keeping him at that Z? Because that's the biggest thing from last year is Calvin kind of found his success in playing that Z type role instead of the X. And even though he had an amazing week 1 game with the Jaguars last year as the X, we saw throughout the season that trying to force him into that that square peg into a round hole there, it just really doesn't work. He obviously thrives in the Z, but when you're asking a guy like Treylon Burks to step up into that X, does that change the math a little bit?
I don't think it does for me. Now, this is where I said before the show started, JT, we're going to get into the weeds on this thing, and this is our first trip into the weeds here. All right. How does Chicago respond to how the Titans potentially move the receivers around? Are they just going to have Jalen Johnson cover wherever Calvin Ridley's side of the field is, or is it just going to be primarily one side of the field? I don't know how they're going to play that, because you can slot Ridley over into the X spot, but it might not change the matchup, so to speak. We don't know how Chicago is going to respond and play that. So I think my inclination would be to keep players where they've practiced all summer and where they're the most comfortable. And in that case, it is the Z for Ridley, the slot for Boyd. And then I think if Hopkins can't go, listen, they have said Burks is his backup at the X spot. So I would think if they're being forthright with that, then Burks is going to be the guy to get that spot. But we've also heard Brian Callahan talk about Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and how he can do a little bit of everything too. So I think that's why I say if Hopkins can't go, this really is going to be a moment of truth for Treylon Burks.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of getting in Treylon Burks' new role, it definitely would be him getting thrown into the fire straight away, which I think would be a true test here. I think Nick also brings up an interesting point. Maybe more 2 tight end sets if DeAndre Hopkins can't go. I hate to say like that, Treylon Burks' role in this game could be just kind of clear outs for these 2 tight end sets to really work over the middle. Year. I mean, that's kind of what he did. We obviously want to see him do more, but we saw him, command that respect down the field. And so if that means DeAndre Hopkins can't go and we see Treylon Burks kind of, playing that downfield role, I think that opens a lot of possibilities for Chig, Josh Wiley, Nick Vannett to really find a substantial role here without DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think that's why from what we can glean from Brian Callahan's comment on not calling up another wide receiver and being happy with what they have, I think there's reason to believe that they're going to feel comfortable running the ball, throwing screen passes. I've already said I think it's going to be a big Tyler Boyd game because of how much zone Chicago plays, specifically on first and second down. So I look at it as a situation where how much are they really going to lean on that X spot in this particular game? If it's Hopkins, I think he can do kind of what Boyd can do in terms of how he can attack this specific defense. So I think it'd be good to have somebody out there, but I don't necessarily know that that's a spot that they're going to lean on in the game plan, so to speak.
Yeah, or, we could always just do what Jake says here and throw Burks and Jaquan to the slaughter with Jalen Johnson, since he doesn't shadow, and get an advantageous matchup, I guess, sacrificing one piece for the greater good.
Why not?
Sounds like. But hey, if you are like Jake and you watched last night's game, and you are kind of reveling in your woes because Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce didn't do really good for you last night, hey, that's okay, because we have the fix for you, and that's Sinkers Beverages, serving East Nashville for 4 decades. They are a 3-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year. And you know what? It's a great place to shop, whether it's beer, wine, spirits. They have you covered with, anything that you could probably think of in your head. If you can think of something or, a certain brand, they most likely have it. Hey, you can also join their in-crowd for special benefits, allocations, events. When they do special weekly tastings, they'll let you know when they get something brand new in stock. They'll shoot you an email so you can head on over there, and pick up your fix for a bad Mark Andrews week. That's something that Sinkers Beverages does for you very well. Follow them on socials everywhere, on Instagram, Twitter, at Sinkers Bevs. Search Sinkers also on Uber Eats and have the booze delivered to your house, especially, hey, we got another football game tonight. Eagles, Packers. Don't want to leave the house after you've already come home from work. It's like we said, it's the happy hour here on the Hot Read podcast. Just search Sinkers Beverages on Uber Eats, and they drive so that you can drink. It's a win-win for everybody.
There you go.
You also check out Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville. If you're out there, their sister store, as Stoney pulls up the cup there. They've been serving the local community, as it says on that cup, for over 50 years. And just, it's great when we can shop local and support local businesses. So thank you to Sinkers and Bluegrass Beverages for sponsoring this show.
Nailed it.
So let's move on to some, you kind of gave us a little taste of getting into the weeds. Let's jump right into it. And I think this is where the meat and potatoes of our discussion will be today. The matchups to watch for in this game, I think is a big discussion here, because, we could preview the game and tell you position by position, go all the way down this roster and say, this is what I think here. This is what I think. I think there's a smarter way to do that, in that I think with these matchups this week, these are the most important ones that really, if you come out of this game and say Chicago won or the Titans won, it's because of these things. And I think these are a couple of the ones that are going to be the key pieces and key matchups that tell the tale of this game. First one I think we have to bring up here is Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat versus that Chicago offensive line. We've seen one piece of Jeffrey Simmons in practice looking absolutely dominant. We've seen T'Vondre Sweat just absolutely bullying people in preseason. We have not seen it put together, and that's something I'm super excited to see this weekend. It's something that I think Chicago is definitely going to have to prepare for here, as their offensive line has been good at times, but it lacks that consistency, I think, last year that Justin Fields struggled under. That's one of the biggest ones, I think. If Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat can do what they've been advertised to do, Caleb Williams is gonna have little to no time in the pocket this weekend.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, your counter to that could be, well, Caleb Williams is pretty dangerous outside of the pocket, but that's where you assume your coverage is holding up down the field and press man against this stacked Chicago receiving core. But I think you're right here. I think this is kind of the engine that gets the car going for that Titans defense, is whether or not Tavondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons are generating interior pressure, collapsing the pocket so there's nowhere for Caleb Williams to step up into. You're forcing him to get out and make those off rhythm, off platform, altered arm angle kind of throws in space. And for a rookie that might not necessarily know what's coming, what he's looking at, I think that's kind of the thing that makes the whole defense go for the Titans. If they can succeed there, I think it makes everyone else's job a little bit easier. Now, I do think the interior of the Bears offensive line is where they are probably the weakest. I like Braxton Jones. I like Darnell Wright as bookend offensive tackles. I think they could make it hard for guys like Arden Key and for Harold Landry. But I think up the middle is where the Titans front should be striking. Now, you imagine if they are going to be blitzing and being a little more aggressive, if you can get Simmons and Sweat collapsing that pocket and then getting somebody through because they've completely put the interior offensive line of the Bears in a blender, I think you could start seeing some real nasty throws from Caleb Williams, because his tape at USC was littered with just reckless throws from him, just getting the ball out almost in a panic, playing a little bit of that hero ball style, that sort of thing. So I think this is a really paramount, importantly matchup for the Titans defense in this one. What I'm curious to see how the Bears offensive line plays in run blocking, because we saw the 49ers, how they handled Sweat in the preseason. His aggressiveness, his aggression, they almost willingly gave him a lane. And when he got into the lane, they got to his side, flipped their hips, and started moving him, pushing him to the side. And what that did was effectively open up. Yes, he had a path to the quarterback, but they were playing it to kind of push him sideways to open up the run lane behind the offensive lineman. So if we start seeing that, I think that's probably the ticket to how Chicago starts effectively running the ball. And if they're able to do that, I think that's how they kind of build momentum and maybe settle Caleb Williams down into the game a little bit. So I think there's a lot riding on the shoulders of Simmons and Sweat in this one.
Yeah, and you talk about settling them down, right? And I think Kenneth in the comments had a really good, suggestion. And I think it's something that Brian Callahan is definitely considering. Kenneth says, if I'm Callahan and I win the toss, I'd want to receive the ball, and I'm using and he's usually a defer person, calm that crowd down and,
Sure.
take as much momentum and excitement out of the building as possible. I do know that I don't know if this is a Callahan thing, if this is a Zach Taylor thing, but the Cincinnati last year was a big team that always really leaned into receiving the ball if they in the first half, if they are winning that coin toss, whether that is a Brian Callahan thing or an ideology of the Bengals that he brings over to this team. I think we'll have to wait and see. But if I was Brian Callahan, I'm doing everything I can to, these Bears fans have been just bottling everything up and are going to explode on Sunday. And so I think the biggest thing is to start fast and start early this weekend, and that by way of probably silencing that crowd.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that's a bad idea from Kenneth at all, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier. These Chicago fans are rabid for a winner right now, and they look at Caleb Williams as a generational talent. No, I don't quite think he's there yet, but it's the hope of having a new quarterback, a new offense. These guys are going to be loud on Sunday, and it is going to be a factor for the Titans offense to deal with. So if you can go down and score early, then yeah, you do yourself the favor of quelling that crowd a little bit.
Yeah, I think definitely playing into the confidence of these two quarterbacks is going to be a big thing, because if these quarterbacks are feeling flustered from the get-go, that's where you see, probably segueing into one of the next matchups, is this where the secondary really has the chance to shine here in this game, because you do have two. Caleb, this is his first game, no experience at all. And Will Levis, some experience, 10th, it'll be his 10th start, but I wouldn't say that he's a veteran of the league yet. And he still is pretty inexperienced and was tweaking a lot of things this offseason. But that means that this secondary both secondaries have the opportunity to really take advantage of that. Like you said, Caleb Williams maybe trying to play a little bit of hero ball and just throw to get the ball out. That's where I think Will Levis, we saw plenty of that last year. And you're coming into this game with two secondaries who have been productive playmakers. Ryan Walker in the comments here says, do y'all see Kevin Byard being a problem for the squad in any way? I think there's a lot of potential for Kevin Byard to be a problem when you look at historically Kevin Byard, in his production and turnovers. Since 2017, Kevin Byard is second in the league amongst defensive backs with 28 interceptions since then. But if you look on the other hand, the Titans have a very productive turnover player of their own, bringing in Quandre Diggs, who is fifth on that list with 24 interceptions since 2017. And then you have a guy like Amani Hooker, who in the last 2 years in week one had an interception in both games in week one. So he's kind of coming into that streak here, trying to make it go 3 for 3 on week one interceptions. Those are productive playmakers. And so you have to really take care of those guys and be pretty aware of those guys. So when you go into this matchup, those guys in the secondary versus Will Levis or Caleb Williams not being stupid with the ball, for lack of better words, it is one of the biggest matchups. You want to see those quarterbacks be able to, and withstand them trying to take advantage of them.
Yeah, and as far as Kevin Byard goes, I would quote the great Mike Herndon from Football and Other F Words this week. That is a matchup I would want to test pretty early on if I'm Will Levis and Brian Callahan, because I think Byard looked like he had lost a step with the Philadelphia Eagles down the stretch last year, but I would also say that this style of defense is probably more conducive to his skill set, because his most productive years here in Tennessee were what? Like rangy, free safety, ball hawking kind of play behind a defensive front that could really get after the quarterback. And I think that's what they've built here in Chicago. I think stylistically, he's a pretty good fit for what they do on defense in Chicago, but I'd want to know the athletic limitations. I'd be testing that matchup pretty early on. Maybe you get that. Maybe there's the Tyler Boyd numbers. He can rack up some yardage there in that matchup. But you didn't even mention like Jaquan Brisker at safety is a pretty good player for the Chicago Bears. In addition to Tyreek Stevenson and Jalen Johnson on the outside, they've got another one of those Washington DBs, man. I don't know what it is, the run that they've been on, just churning them out. But Kyler Gordon is no slouch either. This is going to be a frustrating defense just by virtue of the personnel that they use. Matt Eberflus wants to rush 4, win with 4, and drop 7 into coverage. And if you're Will Levis, you've got to start figuring out how to read where guys are pretty early on and in real time, because they're going to have bodies in space. They're going to clog up throwing lanes, even with the linebackers too. This is a secondary that you've got to kind of figure out what they're going to do on those first and second down plays when they are more likely to be in their base defense. And if you can crack that code, good, you're cooking. But they've got the talent. They've got the bodies in the secondary to really give Will Levis fits.
I think you bring up a good point there with how the Bears operate their defense, sending 4 and dropping 7. I think that's a big matchup this week, considering the matchup is going to be that kind of defense versus Brian Callahan's want and almost maybe reliance on the play action game for this Tennessee Titans team. I went back and looked at a couple of stats of how this defense operated last year, and the Bears allowed successful plays on 41% of pass attempts on play action passes last season, which was second best in the NFL. And the Bears allowed their opponents to be successful on 40% of plays on play action passes last season, which was third best. And I think when you look at this Titans offense, who is predicated on a lot of that with Will Levis early in the offseason and what we've seen from them, that's going to be a big matchup. Can Brian Callahan scheme this defense that has been able to kind of be effective against play action? Can he outwit them? I think that's a big matchup. And like you said, with the secondary that they have, you're going to have a tough matchup every single time that you're trying to throw the ball.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a big part of the cat and mouse game. It's, can Will Levis and company get those safeties to move? Can they get him off the spot and that sort of thing? I think that's where they can find success. I also think that this defense plays a little far back. They play a little off, and they give receiver space in front of him. It does remind me a lot of the recent Shane Bowen defenses here in Tennessee. It's not, doesn't strike me as much disguising as Shane Bowen and company did, but I think these guys like to keep players in front of them to eliminate the big plays, but it does make them susceptible to underneath routes that break in or break out. And that goes back to why I think Tyler Boyd is somebody that Will Levis could lean on to really test that secondary. But I think there will be an element of gamesmanship there schematically. How can we kind of get these guys turned around in their zone or off the spot to maybe open the throwing window just a little bit so that Will Levis isn't testing these guys into tight windows, that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of cat and mouse going on when it comes to this passing game, trying to crack the code of what this Bears zone coverage is going to look like.
Hurricane Lou in the comments here says Boyd anytime touchdown worth a dart. Sounds like from you,
brother,
Stoney,
I'm on
that you are all the way on that train. And Zach also in the comments saying, gonna see Byard get torched once and I'll shed a tear. Yes, probably mixed emotions from Titans fans on Kevin Byard in this game for sure.
I tell you what, man, I'm looking at maybe a play getting Jaquan Jackson one-on-one with Kevin Byard, or maybe seeing if they can slip Tony Pollard to the second level with the safeties coming up. And I'll be curious to see how they test that matchup, because I do think at the very least, if being generous to Kevin Byard, I think you can say he's a good fit for this style of defense, but he's still among their top 5 defensive backs. I think he's probably the 5th best one at this point in his career.
Yeah, I would agree. There were the warning signs with him last season before the trade deadline, and then you kind of see him have to acclimate to a whole team, and you kind of see the train fall off the tracks there for him last season. Now, being in this building and having the whole off season to kind of get acclimated into this new system, I think that'll be a big, important one to watch out for. And I think Zach also says Burke's 60 plus yards and TD parlay incoming. I feel like if you get Treylon Burks down the field, that's a matchup I want to see as well. If they drop and Treylon Burks catches a deep ball, he has the ability to probably burn Kevin Byard.
I've got a hot take brewing about Treylon Burks in this game, and this is exclusively for the Hot Read podcast here. Doing my tape study, watching the Bears defense, assuming a lot is going to translate from last year's defense to this year's unit. Now, Matt Eberflus has said he's added a few new wrinkles. He even, hold on to your britches for this one, JT. He ran a slot corner blitz during the preseason. I couldn't believe my eyes. Gonna add a few wrinkles, but I think this is still basically going to be the same defense. Now, if Hopkins is out and Burks is in that X spot, Greg Cosell broke this down on this week's episode of The Install pretty well, and I concur wholeheartedly. He talked about Chicago being in their base defense, rushing with 4, dropping 7 into coverage on first and second down, and third down, specifically third and long, or if the opponent is backed up into their own end. That's where he gets a little exotic with the blitzes, and that's when his corners typically play man. So if you've got Jalen Johnson on Calvin Ridley and you've got Burks on the other side of the formation on his own against Tyreek Stevenson, who I said earlier, I don't think he's the best press man corner. I don't think that's where he excels. If he's playing press man and it's a one-on-one matchup with Treylon Burks, if Burks can get by him, they've got an opportunity for a shot play on third down if Eberflus tries to get a little tricky. And that might be a matchup that the Bears are sleeping on. I don't think what Zach put in the chat there is all that crazy. I think that could happen on one play.
Yeah, I mean, how about that to start the year? Maybe a third down, take a shot play at the beginning of the game there. That would get people riled up, and probably give Treylon Burks an absolute rocket ship of boost of confidence right there.
I would be keeping that one in my back pocket if I were Brian Callahan. Third down, they're probably going to do something a little reckless, maybe in man situations, and maybe that's a matchup that you can actually leverage Burks' athleticism to win.
Yeah, and another one that I think with all of this newness for this Tennessee Titans team, I think another matchup here is definitely the interior offensive line, how Peter Skoronski, Lloyd Cushenberry, and Dylan Radins, how they're able to mesh, especially against a very, very good Chicago front line that, after acquiring Montez Sweat last year, kind of turned the entire defense on its head, made them an efficient and group you do not want to take, you want to take them seriously. You don't want to just, let them go, and you have to pay attention to them, I think. And so we talked about Lloyd Cushenberry this training camp as, being that center of the offense, literally, kind of being that general of the offensive line. How Peter Skoronski and Dylan Radins kind of mesh going against a very, very good pass rushing attack is something that I think, it's going to have to happen fast, because if they aren't able to gel, then that's where you're going to start to see them really, really struggle. And especially Will Levis is probably going to maybe end up making a few boneheaded plays because of it.
Yeah, I think this is actually maybe I'm a super hyper sicko nerd for this one, but I think this is actually going to be the defining matchup of the game. I think it's strength versus strength right here. I like the Titans interior offensive line, how it's been reshaped. I like what the Bears do with their defensive front. I noticed a lot of speed to power moves from the defensive ends, Sweat, and they added DeMarcus Walker in the offseason as well. Titans legend. I think they're going to be trying to hit the tackles, stress the tackles with speed to power. So Latham and NPF got to be ready to anchor. They got to be ready to counter, that sort of thing. But on the inside, you're going to be asking Cushenberry, Skoronski, and Radins to track the movement, because they did run in 2023 or in 2024's preseason. They ran a lot of stunts consistent with what they did last year. A lot of movement along the two interior defensive linemen. So you're going to be counting on these guys for the Titans that are the interior offensive linemen. You're going to be counting on them to track the movement and hold the pocket. And when these edge rushers counter inside, the guard's going to have to pick them up without giving up pressure to one of the two defensive tackles. I think it's going to be a chess match right there, the numbers game. And then also we expect that the guards and the tackles will be pulling a little more with Bill Callahan's scheme. And you want to see how Skoronski and Radins, even Cushenberry, if they pull him, are kicking out the end man on the end of the line of scrimmage. They're going to get in space and potentially meet Sweat. They're going to meet Sweat at the edge, or they're going to meet Walker. Are they technically sound enough to get their punch in, powerful enough to move the guys off the block when they get into the hole or they get to the second level? The Bears have two really good linebackers. Like, are they going to be able to clear out those blocks? I'm telling you, I think the success of the interior offensive linemen, the two guards in the center for the Titans, is going to be an integral part to their success in running the ball and being efficient and productive against this Bears defense.
And I think we heard yesterday from Bill Callahan, he wholeheartedly agrees with you. He said, we've got our hands full with this group. We're going to have to, we're going to have to take it head on. And that's something that we heard from him. That's a big priority for Bill Callahan in this first game. Will he feel pressured to succeed after game one? That's something that I think we'll definitely have to see. You know who else has their hands full? And this is my final matchup that I'm really watching. That could decide the game this week. The Titans interior linebackers are going to have their hands full with yes. we talk about Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, and DJ Moore. That's all great and well. And you have the corners, I think, to match up pretty well against those three wide receivers. You probably will end up seeing L'Jarius Sneed. L'Jarius Sneed last season in 6 games had a shadow percentage of 65% or more in 6 games last year. Would I be surprised if that's how they set the tone with L'Jarius Sneed kind of shadowing on DJ Moore? Not at all. I think Cheeto versus Keenan, a 230-pound old man Keenan Allen. I think that is, I think that's not a matchup that you're too worried about. I think both of them will have their ups and downs in that game, but I think you have that. Or even if the two flip-flop there and Roger McCreary is playing more on Keenan Allen versus Cheeto on Rome Odunze, I think that's another one. But that leaves guys like Cole Kmet, You have guys like DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson. All four of those guys are more than capable of being productive in the receiving game. Going up against this interior linebacker group and Jack Gibbons, Kenneth Murray, Ernest Jones, if he gets in there for how long, we'll see how much he'll play. That's still to be determined. But guys who we kind of are really down on their ability to succeed in coverage. And what does Cole Kmet and these running backs do a lot? Well, it's eat up in the middle of the field. And so we've seen Cole Kmet kind of be that security blanket for a rookie Caleb Williams. I think that's a big matchup this weekend. Is Jack Gibbons or Kenneth Murray or Ernest Jones able to kind of meet the crossroad there and sack up and really take on this challenge? I think that's one that if they are able to show us more than we are expecting in the coverage game, I think that is a big that's a big area where Caleb Williams will just not have access to. But if our priors are confirmed here and Cole Kmet is just doing Cole Kmet things and they're able to check down to DeAndre Swift or Khalil Herbert, who are really good in space, I think that's where you're going to see a problem for this Titans defense.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, JT. You said it yourself, what I was going to say right there. All three of these running backs are really good in space, and that's the thing that concerns me. Now, if we're talking about gap integrity, Jack Gibbons, as much as people want to shit on him, Jack Gibbons, really good gap sound run defending linebacker.
There's the one FCC right there. The one
allowed, there we go.
The one allotted FCC word.
Ernest Jones, the fourth, Kenneth Murray, we expect are going to be hyper aggressive in pursuing the run. See ball, get ball is what we've said all summer long. My concern is if Chicago starts getting these running backs to the second level and dinking and dunking the ball to him to get it to him in space, it is a matter of coverage at that point. And I'm with you. I do have concerns about that. I think that is a matchup that Chicago can exploit, specifically with Cole Kmet. I don't know what they're going to do at the Jamal Adams spot now that he's not going to play. But in those situations, in those dime packages where Cole Kmet is on the field, that's a matchup that I think Chicago can exploit. He has the size. It's an old football cliche, but he's got the size to match up well against safeties, but he's got the wiggle to match up well with the linebackers. And I like his hands. I think he's a reliable target. I think this is a guy that could have like 12 catches in this game for like 80 yards or something like that, but just routinely dinking and dunking and just chewing up the Titans defense, death by a million paper cuts sort of thing. So I'm with you. I think you listed 4 players for the Bears that could present a specific problem for this Titans defense, no matter how aggressive they are.
Yeah, and Hurricane asks, so both offenses looking to exploit underneath. I think that's kind of how you do it, and then take the top off with a guy like Treylon Burks on some of those big looks. On
third down.
Yes, on third down. There you go. Only third down specifically. Ed says, I want to see turnovers from this defense where you are overdue to have a D that turns the ball over. Well, you add, like I said earlier, guy in Quandre Diggs, who has been very productive in turnovers. You look at Amani Hooker, L'Jarius Sneed, you go back to his last game he played as a Chief. I mean, he was the reason almost that they basically won that game with the turnover against Zay Flowers. I think Denard Wilson brings that style of defense where, we heard 2 or 3 years ago, this new wave of Ravens defense being you're always trying to punch the ball. Like that was a team that predicated themselves on being able to turn the ball over. And now you bring that aggressiveness and that dog mentality that we've heard Denard Wilson talk about to this team. I think that's something that you'll definitely be able to see. D Good in the comments here just saying, can I just say the show was good before, but with JT and Stoney, this show fucks so hard. And I'll use my FCC word. There you go. So
you said it. Oh, buddy.
I did. So appreciate you in the comments here.
I want to speak to Ed's question real quick before I lose the thought, because that's how my brain works. It's there 1 second and just completely gone the next. Talking about creating turnovers, I think Denard Wilson's defense is conducive to that because you have man corners that are going to force tight windows. And especially later on in games, if the coverage holds up and quarterbacks get more and more desperate to make the throws down the field, they're a little more willing to throw into the tight coverage, building a narrative as to how these turnovers happen. But they're throwing into windows that are tighter, common sense dictates that there's going to be more ball production from the secondary. But I also think there's a way to create turnovers with how aggressive this defense is, with the linebackers shooting gaps, blitzing heavily, creating fumbles, the interior pressure from Tavondre Sweat, Jeffrey Simmons, tipping passes, batting balls down, however you got to get them. I think this is going to be an aggressive, active defense, and if executed properly, I think Ed's going to be happy. I think he's going to see the turnovers that he's been wanting to see out of this defense.
I agree. Well, I think that's going to do it for our the matchups we want to see. Those are, we've come into the weeds and now we are out of the weeds there. Hopefully that made sense to y'all. It made sense to me like it does to me and Stoney. As you said before the show, how many people will we lose in our discussion today? I don't know. But I think that segues us perfectly into the return of maybe the best segment on this show, my personal favorite segment, the Best Bet Gauntlet. It's here, baby. We are back. Week 1, Best Bet Gauntlet. Obviously, it's going to look a little bit different. Not exactly myself and Stoney going head to head, but at least myself, maybe Stoney, we're going to bring you 5 picks every single week that are hopefully making you money. Last year, I know at the end of the Best Bet Gauntlet last year, I was up, I think, around 24-ish units last year, had a phenomenal season, and looking to we're looking to repeat that. We're trying to make you guys and myself money. So it is a win-win for everyone. Like we always say on the show, if you're not betting with the Best Bet Gauntlet, you just simply do not want to make money. And so with that, I think we can still go back and forth here, Stoney. So I'll give a pick, you give one of your picks, and that's how we'll end the show here. Kind of make it, we're not making, not going to do 30 minutes on this, but definitely going to give you some quick facts and our thoughts on why we are making these bets. And I'm going to start off with the first one. We just talked a lot about the Titans. Why don't we talk a little bit more? I'm taking Tennessee plus 4.5. And if you're saying that's not the line anymore, well, you should have been like me when I tweeted out earlier this week that, hey, I'm locking in this line, taking it now. So you got to be following the Hot Read podcast and myself on Twitter if you want the best of these lines. And that's what I did earlier this week because it has seen itself fall. I'm still pretty okay with it at the 3.5. I would play it there. I wouldn't do the flat 3 personally. Maybe if it gets to 3 and it's bet back down because of the sharp action coming in on Tennessee, maybe buy yourself a half a point and get that little teaser there above the number. But I'm taking Tennessee plus 4.5 this week. I think it's one of my favorite bets of the week, and it really comes down to everything we talked about. But still, the numbers from a betting standpoint do not favor a first overall rookie quarterback making his first start. The history still favors the underdog here, as first overall picks have struggled in this spot since the NFL AFL merger. 5 first overall quarterbacks have been favored in week 1 by a spread of 3 or more. Those rookies have gone 1-4 against the spread as well as outright in those games. So they're 1-4 in those games as well. And then looking at all first overall quarterback picks against the spread in week 1, the Young Guns also found little success to the start of their NFL careers. Since the merger, there's been 18 of those quarterbacks, and they've gone 5-12-1 against the spread. I think Denard, despite what some major ESPN reporters and insiders may say about this Denard Wilson defense, I wholeheartedly disagree with them. I think he's going to cook up some insane blitz packages to kind of say, hey, kid, welcome to the NFL. I like the Titans here plus 4.5. It may not win the game, but I like them to keep it close in this one.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, JT. I got my 4.5 earlier in the week as well, so I'm feeling pretty good about that one. Let's stick with Bears and Titans for my first pick. I'm going to look at a player prop here, and I'm going to read a stat that our buddy Zach gave to us in the DMs yesterday, if I can find it on here. Okay. It's in the rundown somewhere. Where was it at? Screen game. There we go.
Yeah, all right. It is. I was going to highlight it for you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Producing and on the air at the same time. Hats off to you, JT. So
multifaceted here.
The screen game against the Chicago defense, Zach passed this stat along to us. Last year, they gave up 8.1 yards per attempt on screen passes, highest in the league by far. Talked about the matchup against the zone coverage and why I think the underneath stuff, the screens are going to work against the Bears defense. I am looking at that, and I'm looking at Tyjae Spears. His receiving yardage total is sitting right there at 15.5. I'm smashing the over because I think there are going to be screens in this game. I do think they're going to get Spears the ball in space, and I think he could hit the over on one single catch. So I'm going JT, let's lock it in. Tyjae Spears over 15.5 receiving yards.
Yeah, I'll be riding with you on that one. It's simple as just getting NWI, the wide receiver blocking king out there in front of him.
There you go.
Have it in one. I like that one a lot. My next pick here, I'm going with the Carolina Panthers, +4 here. It might sound gross, but hey, this is week 1 is one of, if not the most hardest. It's one of the hardest weeks to bet across the entire season. And sometimes you have to take gross picks like this. Carolina +4. I think that this Carolina Panthers team is probably better than a lot of the public thinks they are. Just a couple quick numbers on this as well. They're going up against the Saints here, which, newsflash, I am not high on the Saints this season whatsoever, especially Derek Carr, hashtag the agenda. If you know, you know. In his coaching career, Dennis Allen, that being, is 24-46 straight up. That's a 34.3% win rate, worst among all active head coaches. And then you have to consider Derek Carr in this spot as well. Derek Carr is 500 against the spread or worse as a favorite in 7 straight seasons since 2017, where he is 48, 62, and 3 against the spread. Not numbers you really want to bet with. I like what David Canales can bring to Bryce Young. I think Bryce Young has a very sleeper-ish type season here where he could absolutely explode on the scene. I like the new offense that they have, spending $100 million on 2 guards to protect him. I like the Deontay Johnson trade. Xavier Leggett, if he can, whatever he finds a role here, I think he's going to be good as well. I think the Carolina Panthers in this divisional game here keep it a lot closer than the 4. I think they could potentially also win. So give me Carolina getting 4 over the field goal.
Man, I like that one. I'm on Carolina too. I think people are sleeping on that team. And another factor to consider in this, the bigger picture, I think the Panthers with Dave Canales as calling plays as the head coach, I think are going to win people a lot of money this season because I think they're going to remember the 2-15 play of the last couple of years. And I think that's going to be in bettors' minds, and they're going to bet against Carolina quite a bit, and they're going to cover quite a bit as well. So I like the pick there. I'm with it. I'm going to go the Browns Cowboys matchup. I am expecting a huge step back, a huge regression from the Cowboys this year. They've kind of lost their way on defense since Dan Quinn departed, and I think it's going to be tough sledding on offense. I think Dak is starting to come back down to earth. I don't have a lot of faith in Mike McCarthy. I think it's a big step back year for Dallas. Cleveland sitting there as a 2.5-point favorite. You kick a field goal, you cover. That seems like easy money to me. I'm not that high on Deshaun Watson. I don't think he's a very good quarterback. And I do wonder how their run game holds up without the presence of Bill Callahan in the coaching tree. But I think it comes down to defense for me. I think Myles Garrett is arguably the best defensive player in the game right now. I think they're going to smother this new look offensive line in this game particularly. Dallas is going to be breaking in a new tackle in Tyler Guyton, who I wasn't really that high on to begin with. They've moved him from right tackle to left tackle. I know he's had some good play in the preseason, but I think that's a matchup that Cleveland exploits. They make it really hard on Dallas to move the ball here, and they end up smothering them and winning this game outright. So I'm going with the Browns in this matchup.
I like that pick, especially in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Cleveland being tough, it becomes a tougher and tougher place to play for sure every single year. With my third pick here, with the best bet gauntlet, I'm taking at my first favorite of the year. I'm taking the Atlanta Falcons -3.5 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, which I know it's a little tough. And that's why week 1, you kind of have to go against some trends in the league in week 1 because everybody's on the blank slate here. I understand the Steelers. and Mike Tomlin being an underdog. You rarely want to bet against that. He's 59, 35, and 4, 63% as an underdog. Mike Tomlin is with the Pittsburgh Steelers. However, we've seen this week that Russell Wilson is not 100%. Does he end up playing? Does Justin Fields play? I'm not high on this Pittsburgh team really at all. A team that's coming in right now that is on fire, I think, is the Atlanta Falcons. I think that defense has been totally reworked, and I think they're going to be a prolific offense that is just scoring a bunch of points. And so when you put these two teams up against each other, one team where I really don't know what their offensive identity is going to be in Arthur Smith's led Pittsburgh offense versus his old team there, the Atlanta Falcons, who are bringing in, shiny new toys with everything that they've gotten with Kirk Cousins and in the second year Bijan Robinson. I expect the Falcons to just simply score a lot more points than the Pittsburgh can keep up with. And so with that, I'm going to take Atlanta here -3.5. I'm okay with getting over the field goal because I think they win by a touchdown.
I'm going to let you take Atlanta in that spot, and I don't know that I'm going to touch that game because I like Pittsburgh's defense, and I like Mike Tomlin as well. So I'm gonna let you go out on a limb on that one, and you have your
sometimes
fun.
you gotta swallow the ugly one sometimes, but
I'm going to go back to Bears Titans, and y'all are going to have to sweat this one out, but I really like the point total at 44.5. And I think it's going to be a late situation that they hit the over on that. I think there are opportunities for big plays. I think for one, we talk about the Titans being aggressive on defense, but that can also lead to big plays when they do have weaknesses in the middle of the field, like we've talked about. I won't be surprised at all to see Cole Kmet score a couple touchdowns here, and then maybe Rome Odunze sneak away on a play as well. And likewise, like I talked about, Treylon Burks hitting the explosive as well. I think there are going to be a few big plays in this game that do get it up to around like a 24-27 point total in this one. And even, you could get 24-21 and that would cover a 44.5. So I think that there are going to be a few big plays that define this game, and it may happen in the fourth quarter, but I do think that there's a late touchdown score to hit the over on this one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in that one, especially considering, just how many holes, the perceived holes both these teams have to work through, and kind of the amount of different things they have to keep attention to and pay attention to. That's something that, you can't keep track of it all at one time. But I do agree with you. I think also what you bring up about Cole Kmet is pretty funny because there's a real possibility that every single week when we do this segment, we just end up telling people to bet on the opposing tight end that the Titans are playing. And it's simply just like, it's week 2, Tyler Conklin, baby, take him to the moon.
Anytime touchdown score.
With my fourth pick here in the best bet gauntlet, I'm taking Antonio Pierce's Raiders +3 headed to the Los Angeles Chargers, on the road divisional game. I really don't consider, the Chargers home to really be that big of a deal there. I'm sure there probably will be more Raiders fans at SoFi this weekend anyways. But Antonio Pierce, since he became the head coach, interim or not, has been on fire and has clearly sent a message to this Raiders team that they're bought into. He's 7-1-1 against the spread since taking over. And I think when you look at a team like the Raiders here, who kind of have a lot of things figured out, that defense I think is legit and has the possibility to be a top 5 defense in the league. You look at them going with Gardner Minshew, which I'm not crazy about, but I think he's been serviceable, especially going back to last season. You look at the offensive line being improved. This is a team that I think even through the offseason, re-signing Antonio Pierce as their head coach, continued that momentum. You talk about the guys who were so bought in that they said they wanted to leave, and if Antonio Pierce was not their coach. I think this is a team that is bought in and is going to come into the season a lot more prepared than a lot of other teams because they've been bought in for so long. Across the pond there, the proverbial pond, I guess you could call it, the Chargers are an amalgamation of moving parts that I just don't really buy into this season. I really like Justin Herbert, but like Justin Herbert is now, he woke up 15 seconds ago and he said, "What's going on? What's new with the team?" And I think I saw this on Gridiron Heights or something, and it was like John Harbaugh's like, "Hey, I'm here. Yeah, all your friends are gone, and we're a running team now." and so but it is true. I mean, this is a team that their defense, I'm not crazy about the defense whatsoever. I think people overrate it because of the players that, had promise once. I think Khalil Mack is fine, but he's not at the same level. Joey Bosa struggles to put it together at some time, and their secondary has had wild issues. But, it seems really tough for this Justin Herbert team, improved offensive line, but at the same time, like, when they start sending that pass rush with Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins and all of those guys, you no longer, you're going to have a tough time running the ball. But then also when you're trying to set up the run to kind of take the top off this Raiders defense, they don't have anybody anymore. Keenan Allen's not there. Mike Williams. I don't think you're going to try to send Ladd McConkey over the top. So you're relying on guys like Joshua Palmer and Gerald Everett to kind of be those guys, right? I'm not really buying it, and it's why I think, when this matchup ever comes up, I'm always taking the underdog in this one, because these two teams play each other close mostly all the time. So I'm taking the Raiders to probably upset the Los Angeles Chargers here at home, taking the +3.
Yeah, I kind of like that Raiders money line myself. I think this Raiders team is going to be tough. My assessment of them, I think they're the new Mike Vrabel Titans. I think this is going to be a team that prides itself on running the ball, getting home with the defensive front, playing good enough coverage on the back end to stifle teams. I think they're going to be a fiery team. They play hard for their coach. I don't know, man. I'm looking at it like this kind of reminds me. I think there are parallels to Mike Vrabel's Titans teams. I think you're going to win some money betting on the Raiders this year.
I do too.
Yeah, so I am going back to the well again, the Bears Titans game. Rome Odunze over 3.5 catches. I think it's going to be a coming out party for him if L'Jarius Sneed does shadow DJ Moore. I think Odunze gets some looks against Roger McCreary in the slot. I think he gets some looks outside against Cheeto. And the yardage total, I think the last I looked, it was set somewhere around like 44.5. I don't know about that, but I do feel good about him getting at least 4 catches, and think that if Sneed is successful in shutting down Moore altogether, that Odunze could end up being the primary target for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, look at that. You've kind of built yourself a mini Titans Bears parlay right there. Tyjae Spears over in the game 44.5, and Rome Odunze's over 3.5. I think that could be a sneaky good play.
It's because all the tape I've watched this week has just been getting ready for this game. I've just been watching Titans and Bears all week, so and it's week 1. I don't want to go out on a limb for any of these other matchups. I feel good about this one, so I'm gonna stay in my lane.
There you go. And nothing wrong with that. And with my final pick, there might be something wrong with me here, because this is probably my grossest pick of the week, but I'm going with it. Minnesota -2.
That is gross.
Going to play the Giants. Listen, I think both these teams are as mid as you possibly can get. Daniel Jones, I'm not a huge fan. I don't know a lot of people who are, but on the other side, I do like some of these things that the Vikings do have. I do think Sam Darnold has probably matured and gotten better ever since he went to the 49ers. I know there's been a lot of talk about how Kyle Shanahan really helped him out with a lot of things. And so, when you look at a guy, an offense like the Vikings have this year with guys like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson was putting up 100 yards with Nick Mullins slinging it. I think Sam Darnold is comparable to Nick Mullins, if not a little bit better. This is a game where I think the Minnesota comes in, and with a lot of people questioning now what's their identity with JJ McCarthy going down, you look at this team and no Kirk Cousins as well. You look at this team and they come out there and want to prove that they are still legit in the NFC North, going up against an opponent here in the Giants who just do not have a lot of things going for them. Malik Neighbors is nice, but I do like the secondary this Vikings team has. I'm really concerned for the Giants secondary against Justin Jefferson this week.
Yeah.
But with that, I do like the Minnesota to win this one. It's going to be a gross one, but I like them to win by a field goal. So I'm going to take -2.
That's one I don't think I'm touching with a 10-foot pole, because there's
it's gross.
There's such a wide range of outcomes with that game that I don't even know if I want to watch it, to be honest with you. I might just forget that game exists. My last one, I'm going to keep it short and sweet because we have been running pretty long today. I'm taking the Texans -2.5 because the Colts freaking stink. They're awful.
Hey,
I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the
nothing
league.
Wrong with a gut check bet there.
Yeah,
so that's going to do it for
ride.
our best bet gauntlet here. Here are my 5 again. Tennessee +4.5, Carolina +4, Atlanta -3.5, Las Vegas +3, and Minnesota -2. 3 underdogs and 2 favorites there. Stoney, you've got yourself a little bit of a Titans-Bears parlay here with Tyjae Spears over 15.5 receiving yards. Bears at Titans over 44.5, and then Roman Dunze over 3.5 catches, along with Cleveland -2.5 and Houston -2.5, 2 favorites. And that's going to do it for the best bet gauntlet and also for us here on this show. But before we go, Ed, got to answer this question here. Ed says, before you guys sign off, must know, Stoney, what's the go-to game day Yankee candle scent? If it's calming, I need to run out and get me one. # no free shout-outs.
I'll tell you what, Ed, run down to your nearest Yankee and ask them if they have Mountain Lodge. I think there are some stores that still have it. I don't know that it's still in production. It's a very good, musky kind of smell that always reminds me of heading to the Smoky Mountains as a kid and renting a cabin with my family for the weekend. That's how I relax. It's great for game day. Plays well this time of year as well. Can't go wrong with it. Mountain Lodge is my answer there.
There we go. And so that is going to officially do it for us today. Once again, thank you so much to Sinkers and Bluegrass Beverages for sponsoring this show. Check them out on socials at SinkersBev. Remember, they drive so you can drink. Look them up on Uber Eats. Once again, thank you for sponsoring the show. That's going to do it for me and Stoney here on the Hot Read podcast today. Enjoy the game this weekend, and we will talk to you next week on Tuesday.